Hey there, and welcome to Connect the Dots Learning Center podcast. I'm Stephanie Wagers, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're a seasoned therapist, clinic owner, or just starting out, this podcast is your go to spot for insights, tips, and stories that'll help you connect the dots in your practice. Today, I'll be talking with Sheila Frick, an internationally esteemed clinician, lecturer, and pioneer in occupational therapy. She has over 40 years of clinical experience, having worked in psychiatry, rehabilitation, and home health before specializing in pediatrics. Her expertise includes sensory processing dysfunction, sensory integration, and auditory interventions. Sheila is well known for expanding sensory processing treatments to include sound interventions. She created Therapeutic Listening to meet the need for an easily accessible tool that can be integrated into sensory processing treatment programs. She's trained over 15,000 therapists worldwide to implement therapeutic listening within their clinical practice. She also lectures on such topics as clinical neurology, respiration, the vestibular auditory system, and various auditory interventions. She's the creator and author of Listening with the Whole Body, and co-author of Core Concepts in Action, Astronaut Training, a Sound-Activated Vestibular Visual Protocol, as well as Out of the Mouths of Babes, and more, integrating the mouth with sensory and postural functions. Let's dive in. Sheila Frick, you're an internationally esteemed clinician. You have over 40 years in the field. You created Therapeutic Listening. I know that I'm a huge fan. I've been to a few of your courses and I've been so excited about talking to you. Um, but I want to take it back. Like, how did you even get involved in OT? Tell us kind of your
Well,
story.
it's a funny story because I actually I was actually I guess I am really practical, although I don't think a lot of people think of me that way. Maybe they do. I was this is back now we're back in the 1970s, so have to have a whole different frame of mind. And I was paying for my own schooling and I wanted to have a job and I wanted to be a teacher. Interestingly enough, I come from a very long line of teachers and social workers. So I, however, but I was in the Michigan area and they weren't hiring teachers. It's hard to believe now.
Yeah.
And so, and I kind of wanted to be a social worker. And I was like, just kind of, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I want to make sure that I have a job that is paid well if I'm going to um, put myself through school. I mean,
Right.
what you think is paid well back when you're 19 is always relative. But
Very
anyway,
different. Yes. Yes.
18, 19. So I went to this library and I looked in the Occupational Outlook handbook and I found this job called occupational therapy. And it had all these, like, I loved crafts and arts and psychology. And I'm like, this is great. Oh, the science stuff? I don't know about that. And then it turns out that's probably what I loved the most. And I just fell in love with it. I went to do volunteer work that you had to do before school. And I've just always fell in love with OT from the beginning. And I still think it's one of the greatest professions. And 47 years later, or however long it's been,
Yeah.
I'm still want to practice. I still want to be involved.
Are you still practicing then? Are you still
Well,
training?
so kind of where I'm at right now is I actually treat a handful of kids in my practice, but my practice is in my home. I have my
Okay.
office in my home and my practice in my home. But they're kind of handpicked. I just had a hip replacement not long ago, so my movement was a little limited, and they're kids that
Yeah.
I knew and that I do a lot of work with parents and consulting on home programming and then seeing kids once a month or so to top off their home programs to see how things are going,
Mhm.
somewhat of a coaching style in a
Yeah.
way with families. And so I'm still doing some of that, but I now am moving to um, just having some other friends that have clinics. I'll be going to Michigan in a couple of weeks here, and I will work in a friend's clinic where she has, I don't know, 15 therapists mentoring so that I still get to be on the ground, get to be with kids, get to be
Right.
active in what I love. But I have to say, for some of the kids that I see, I can't physically keep up with them. And it's not that I'm handicapped in any way, but that their needs are that somebody needs to be there, move fast, traverse space, walk over
Yes.
pillows, and possibly catch them,
Right.
if
Yeah.
they're wanting to do something really daring, uh,
Yes.
and to keep them safe. And so I feel just a little bit leery on that account. And then I did have a child say to me, about 6 months ago that I was what did he tell me? I was the king of old because
Oh my
I was
gosh.
like, okay, you're right. I need to stop trying to keep up with you. After I became the king of old, I was like, all right, well, maybe time to do this another way. So, and then I'm also doing a lot of mentoring online with therapists where I like to have video because to me, I can hear about a child, but to see a child to me is a whole
Yes.
visually
Yeah.
and watch them move and function gives me a whole different lens.
So if
So,
someone wanted to mentor with you, they would set it up through Vital Links or
yeah.
through.
Yeah,
Okay.
we actually have a mentoring button on our website. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. And then they would record a video of a problem that they're seeing, and then you
Yeah.
guys kind of talk through it. That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then I try to record the Zoom for them so that then
Hmm.
they can refer back to it.
Yeah.
It's like I think the last one I just did a week or so ago, um, it was a child where she was really working on postural vestibular
Mhm.
visual issues. And so the nice thing is I have so much video stored up over the years from teaching that could go
Just
in
pull
and
that.
like instead of saying do this, I'm going to show you this video. What do you think? Think
I love
something
that.
like this could be helpful, and then
Yeah.
she would say, and then again, she had videos and said, well, I tried that. I said, well, let me see what it looks like. And I'm letting her say, well, here's the issue with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like you are
Yeah.
doing the activity, but if you made these changes, it would
Uh-huh.
change it.
Hmm. I love that. I always loved your courses because you used video of kids, because sometimes, you can lecture about it all the time, but just seeing it in action is like, oh, I get that connection right now.
Yeah, yeah. I think I say you wouldn't know, I'm not like a super organized being, so calling myself practical calls up some of that, but I'm just very like, um, when I teach, I want you to have practical, something tangible
Yeah.
that you can see. And when I'm mentoring, I love to have something tangible I can see back because I think that one of the things that you develop in time, it's not something that you come with, is an eye for observation and ongoing clinical reasoning and reflecting back on what you've done. And you can't do that you can, but it's harder to do with just words.
Hmm. Hmm. So you have worked with some just renowned leaders kind of in the SI field. Tell me, like, if you can think of it, your biggest like takeaway or what really changed you as a practitioner by working with these pioneers in
I
the
think
field.
just incredible minds. And
Yeah.
then I think that I've been drawn to people that are more on the creative side where they take an idea and they flesh it out into practice. I feel like that's what I've done. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I've always from the beginning loved sensory integrative theory. And I started out working in psychiatry in an
Okay.
adult mental health setting, but I did my first presentation 9 months out for AOTA on sensory integration and mental health. And so,
Wow.
and then I've always been drawn to like, who can teach me? And I think I drove to Warren State, Pennsylvania to work with Elaine Utley and Karen Pettit, who were doing like these really innovative things at a state institution just to flesh
Mm.
out ideas. So I feel like I've worked with people who were take an idea and then who create treatment around it. That's been kind of my passion. So I've been really I think when you go across the board, originally working with Patty Otter, who I always say
Yeah.
to her, you would say 4 words or 10 words, and I'd be like, ooh, but what? And what did she just say? And I actually just recently am fleshing something out and making it concrete for people. Like, oh, I said to one of my friends, I finally understand Patty's posture chart. And I said, I have it figured out. And then they said to me, well, great. Will you show it teach it to me when
Yeah.
you're done
Yeah.
creating the presentation? I'm like, yeah, because she understood stuff and could encapsulate it with just a few words. And but yet it was like, what are you really saying? And I'd have to dig in and get the details. So I've been inspired by a lot of people. Pat Wilbarger, another person who really
Yes.
inspired me, just especially like Pat Wilbarger and Mary Kawar, like women of a time where women, there were women that were go-getters. Now that I open my eyes to the world and read multiple
Yeah.
things, always those women, but these really strong leaders
Mhm.
in the field were so inspiring to me. It's like
Mhm.
a marvel to me. And then to, again, like all of the people I've been drawn to have been creating, like, here's the theory. What do you do about it? And then
Mhm.
how do you know that,
Right.
how do you know you made a change? How do you know that it's positive?
And it seems like, the leaders you're referring to, it's just like a selfless passion. You're not
Yeah.
doing it for recognition or anything. It's just this passion that drives you. And you can tell because you love your work.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just am always trying to figure things out. Like, and then
Yeah.
somebody will say something and it intrigues me. And I think,
Uh-huh.
oh, I don't understand it that way. How did they get to that? And then
Right.
I always call myself an OT historian because, like, who informed them? What information were they working
Mhm.
from? And it's like you go back and back and back. And I'm always sometimes a little bit frustrated with we're doing presentations and now everything has to be cited within the last 5 years. And I think there's so much treasure within the last 20. Or I'll go back and I'll find things that somebody said 20, 30 years ago, and now there's the science for it. I love doing
Yeah.
that. Connect the dots. That to me,
Yes.
it's weaving, it's just, I just love that. I think that
Mhm.
I've always done it. I used to sit on the stairs and read the encyclopedia, you know, when it were just books, and I would just pull out a volume and read something. So I was always just fascinated by information and
Yeah.
things. And it was a kid's encyclopedia, so it was
Yeah.
practical.
Yeah.
Things
Yeah.
I
You
wanted
wanted
to
that
know.
knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
How would you say that your understanding or perspective of sensory integration or dysfunction has kind of changed over the course of your practice?
Well, I think it started with really looking at integration and where AIRS was at. But
Mhm.
I'm going to say too, I think at the time I didn't understand it.
Mhm.
And then so when things started to come into play with like some of Georgia DeGangi and Pat Wilberger were on the heels of like looking at sensory processing from this perspective of sensory modulation and defensive reactions versus hyper responding,
Mhm.
that got really clear to me and I really fleshed that out. And I've kind of come back full circle. It's
Mhm.
really about the integration and how the sensory systems impact the brain from the lower fundamental levels that really provide the integration and the scaffolding for all the higher level function. And then also, particularly vestibular, well, projects to those areas. Well, they all do, and how
Right.
that comes together. And so I'm really still just fascinated with the integration, not one sense over the other.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and then how it all
How
comes together to support function.
Yeah. So give me your like elevator speech to a parent. Like, how do you explain sensory processing or integration to a parent?
I
Because I think
always
we all struggle with this, right?
Right. I don't have a set one. I
Okay.
always am looking at what is the problem and what's going on with the child, and then I explain it from that perspective. And when I'm talking to a parent, they're in with me and they've seen what I've done, and they see when, like, I'm always going for when I do something, I want to see a little bit of change toward the positive.
Yes.
Um, and sometimes it is that you just love it and you stay with it because if, I had a little guy whose idea changed every 4 minutes and he couldn't, not every 4 minutes, every 4 seconds, and he couldn't
Yes.
even play it out. So, but that mom could see when we finally got on an activity, an idea, he was brilliant, and that we acted it out physically and we had it back and forth and he wasn't talking nonstop. Right. So then I would back up because that to her and explain to her, what that is that I think he was struggling with
Hmm.
that didn't allow him to do that and why I was doing what I was doing.
Yeah. Kind of
So
teaching in the moments, pointing it
in the
out.
moment, based on what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I
Right.
don't have many elevator speeches for anything. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, I marveled at, I don't know how many people would still remember if they'd ever seen me lecture with a gentleman, Stephen Cool, who
Oh,
was,
he was a professor. He was my
yeah,
professor. Yeah.
yes, yes, character, just
Oh, yeah. Yes, he was.
and like it never failed that we would get up to teach, and he had a complete script in his head. He said the same word over and over. I don't have that, and every time
Right.
I almost need to be there with. I have slides that have ideas on them, but then every time I do it, it's different. And then as the audience asks questions, then I get a feel for my group, and then That's how I am with parents.
Yeah,
So
you're in the moment.
yeah,
You're in the moment.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah, that's funny. He was our neuroanatomy instructor. I remember every day in class, he had a little pint of yogurt and he would put his 500 vitamins in there and just eat them. So
yeah.
funny.
It's a character. He was a character.
Well, can we talk about primitive reflexes for a
Yeah,
minute? And
yeah,
and just like your take on how they affect the nervous system and the child's function, and then also kind of your thoughts. I see a lot of therapists just give handouts all the time
yeah,
on like things to do, like, hey, do the Moro exercise or do
yeah.
this. And I always want to put it back into function because I don't think our brain works that way.
It
But
doesn't.
just if you can speak to that, I would really appreciate it. So
Yeah,
we
so
can maybe
it
stop the
absolutely
handouts.
doesn't work that way. Think of, I love Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen is an occupational therapist that isn't well known in OT, but she's super well known worldwide in a field called somatics, which is
Okay.
really coming to light in trauma. She would be like the grandmother of somatics.
What was
And
her name again?
Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen.
Okay.
So she worked as an OT, but was way ahead of her time, and then eventually worked with dancers, and then got
Mm,
into a lot of like at the time of Feldenkrais and others, like she was looking at movement from a developmental perspective, and she grew up in the time of reflexes, but I think hers is the best definition. They're the
okay.
alphabet of movement. It's really, you
Mm,
come wired with these reactions, and you have phasic reactions, which are quick acting, and a lot of them serve protection, like acoustic startle, a moro, a flexor withdrawal, and extensor
mm,
thrust. Those are all phasic and have a protective nature.
mhm,
Um, and then you have tonic ones that are about relating to gravity and enhancing tone, that are, those things go into sort of posture and movement, mobility
mhm,
and stability. Um, and the protective ones, they're very wired to the parts of the nervous system, the brainstem mechanisms related to defense. So there's the movements that are related to defense, but that's wired to the amygdala, which is a little higher up, and then hypothalamus, because it has a physiological response through the autonomic nervous system. So, you could write a whole course around a moro, but if you only had a moro, you'd never function in the world. It's just one piece of the whole, and
right.
it's one piece of the protectiveness. It's interesting to look at because it provides a foundation and sets up, you know, however, when things are regulatory, they
Mhm,
go in patterns. If patterns keep repeating themselves, they become a little bit more solid, right? So how it,
mhm,
as an infant, you're taking in information. If you keep startling, it can set up the nervous system in certain ways to keep, running the same program.
mhm,
I mean, even as I say it, I can think of 6 reasons why that's not 100% the truth, but just think of them as
right.
basic, protective, get you moving. Interestingly enough, the acoustic startle starts in utero, and it doesn't even start relative. It's the first way that the fetus moves, in
Mm,
curling up and extending, curling up and extending, which is interesting,
yeah.
like a little seahorse.
Yeah.
And so it's a part of movement. Movement is a part of protection, quick movement,
Right.
right?
Right.
Right? So
Right.
setting that up. So you have phasic and tonic patterns that then are going to be like the alphabet of movement, right? They
Mhm,
provide you with all the movements that you're going to make, but now you have to adapt them to gravity. And so then you have what's the next sort of layer up is writing responses in the vertical and rotational writing, and then those
mhm,
play out, but you're moving your whole body in space. That comes into like midline stability reactions and
mm,
equilibrium reactions. That sort of form the basis for posture and movement. So you have to think about, what I like about the reflexes, they provide a little bit of a roadmap because they're very direct links to sensation.
mhm,
Then these reflexes get you moving,
mhm,
literally.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I think they give you information, but you have to look at it in the context of the whole. And that even if you do something that's about, um, a lot of times I'm doing things to facilitate uh, a startle, but a startle can also be in fun and excitement. It's like we play,
Absolutely.
kids
Yeah.
love to be scared. They love to be surprised.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why do you love to hide? Because when you get found, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like all kinds of layers in that.
Right.
They love
Right.
challenge. We're wired that way. They love that, like not only surprise. The other thing is, I see this in every single one of my grandchildren. I've seen it. I see it in my children. Is like once they can deal with a little bit of balance, they got to walk on every curb, every edge. We're walking in the neighborhood. We go through a rock bed that's a little bit raised. My granddaughter's got to traverse that. She's got to take a challenge, right? So, but it's basically the alphabet of movement that gets spit out. It's affected by how you process sensation, but then how you process sensation is also affected by how your whole environment, your relationship with your mother, how you're held, how you're touched, how you're spoken to,
Mhm.
what's going on in the environment. Is it a nurturing, warm environment that supports your development, or is it have some issues with it? It gets changed by culture. Some cultures don't put their
Right.
babies on the ground because they think
Right.
evil spirits are there, right? So it gets affected by all those things. So you cannot take one little piece and look at it. When people are like, it's all about the Moro. If you just integrate it as Moro, I'm
I
like,
know.
so it's I think it's important. I love we do, of course, building blocks, and it's a real
Mhm.
foundation that gets people linking. Just there's some things you can observe to say, wow, he's in defense. It's not just his behavior. Wow, when that sound happens, it impacts his physiology, it impacts his muscle tone, and the
Mhm.
directionality of his emotion. Maybe it's just into excitement and silliness, but is that then also on the edge of then closer to a meltdown? Or is it into anger and
Mhm.
running away? But it affects that. And
Mhm.
yes, if you calm down someone's body and shift their physiology, which is part of a lot of the things we do that we would call more integration, it would be, yeah, I'm just settling you down, but now I'm going to put you into function. And now can we play with that in function? And then I
Mhm.
like the Moro because it sets up the arms for catching yourself for protection, but it also
Right.
sets the arms connected to the body in this way of like, I want you to come. And I want you, it could look like more, I'm going to get back, like,
Yeah.
oh, help me. And the fingers are stiffer, the more stiff, the more defense. Or I want you, I want a hug, it's
Right.
softer. And pulling things in, pushing things away come from those
Mhm.
combinations of this Moro and flexure extent. It's like they're all pieced together, the alphabet of movement, and we don't move in single letters. We blend and we blend them into sentences and paragraphs. And you could make that be a letter that's friendly, or it could be a doctoral thesis.
Yeah.
It could be a script on a doctor's pad. It would just
Right.
all look different.
Okay.
It's just forms and shapes that are hardwired in the system, but they are linkages to sensory and motor, and they form a foundation for movement. And when you're not processing sensation well, I think it's why it comes up there, they can be impacted in how their development is spit out or truncated or tapped into in trauma.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you could just go on and
Yeah.
on. And then all of the tonic reflexes, there's tonic and phasic vestibular reflexes that are about mobility and stability. And
Mhm.
they might need more input to turn them on. You might need to, the tonic labyrinthine reflex or vestibulospinal that people test by
Mhm.
having you stand up, take your head back. But its positive form is that when you lay on your belly, you sink in. It's Shavasana in yoga. When you lay on your back, you open up. You see runners stretching and they're wide open.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean,
Right.
it's so much broader, but that's not the whole of their whole story.
Right. Right. So these therapists that are just handing out these, different sheets, it's not even
They're,
worth it,
mm,
is it?
well, well, it depends. It would be worth it to a parent who really believed they were helpful and did it in a loving way, and the child had fun.
Mhm.
And if the therapist was really convinced, and if she approached the child with care and observation and touched in a way that joined with the child, I think there's some benefit, but I don't think it's exactly there's no magic. And if you do the opposite, no matter what you do, if you're not connected and you're not feeling in and you're not present, I think it's worthless, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about therapeutic listening. Kind of what inspired you to develop that? I know your husband's a musician, is that right? Or
He's very musical.
he's musical?
We would say that I would say he has a musical brain. He was an actuary, which usually I don't know if you know any, and for all of you out there, if anybody's husband is an actuary that isn't a creative actuary like mine, I'm not being insulting. I loved all of his actuarial friends, but they're very straight and they're numbers people. But Ron sees patterns and he sees them as movement. And so he never really quite fit in the actuarial world because they're pretty often very buttoned up. And if you go to an actuarial party, it's kind of a joke. Like it will be hard to engender conversation with several actuaries, not all of them. So anyway, and he's always loved music. So we started out when I had my first SI practice, and it was sort of, I'd already moved from a smaller clinic to a little bit bigger. I don't think I had anybody. I think it was still all on my own working. I had a speech therapist partner who came in and worked with me. And most of my clients were on the autism spectrum, and most of my clients had been adopted. So you get a little bit of blend of neurodiversity that way, and then just, challenging early experiences.
Right.
And I started to have parents travel quite a distance to do something called auditory integration training. And I thought it was weird. I'm like,
I
oh my God.
remember when that first started. Yes.
I'm like, eye roll. Like, you're going to go sit with them and listen to music for 10 days and it's supposed to make these changes. And
Yes.
I'll say that the families who did go to do it, most of them had children that were severely impacted by their autism. And they were really hoping for talking and a miracle. And that didn't come. And I was focused in that direction too, and didn't really see much until one of my clients went, who was diagnosed on the spectrum. However, he was a preemie and had feeding issues and was very gravitationally insecure. And the only movement we could do was holding him in our lap and bouncing him on a gym ball. And he loved music, and we could get him to accept touch. It took a while outside his mouth, and we're getting inside his mouth without him throwing up. And he was tube fed. He was 3, since the beginning. And when he did AIT with someone else, he started to be able to eat 4 jars of plum baby food at a time, but he didn't tolerate it. He just ate it. It was like, it was the tolerate world just went out the door. And this ability for him to only have a 2-second attention span changed. And he was afraid of the swings, and he would go on the swings. And my husband was my office manager at the time. He said, you have to go do this. It's sensory integration. And, and I said, I'm not doing it. It's just, I'm not doing this. People already think I'm weird because I was doing the Wilbarger protocol, and it was a little bit conservative at the time where I was. People were already like, what's she doing? Right. And so I was like, no, this will be like the kiss of death for me and my reputation in this town. And he's like, well, you know what? You're not going to go get trained. I'm going to get trained. I'm just going without you. And I'm like, oh my God, this is even worse. So I went and got trained. And the truth be known, why I think I'm really doing it was because I myself was very gravitationally insecure.
Okay.
The kids would get on the loft, I would get a chair, I'd climb up with them, and they would jump off, and I would turn around and slither off. I hate to admit it now, but and I just knew I was gravitationally insecure, probably why I left sensory integration. 10 days in, I was throwing myself backwards in the pillows, jumping off.
Wow.
Things. Okay, I don't care what anybody else says. This is sensory integration.
Yeah, it works. Yeah.
This is impacting my vestibular issues. And then, as I traverse different sound techniques, like my motor planning, I couldn't visualize space. I would get in the car and drive to the stop sign. Then I knew I turned one way at the stop sign. It was all visual cues.
And not like seeing it.
And one day after I had been doing some of the higher level, more filtered music, I got in the car and a map popped in my head. And I'm like, wow, people, does this happen to you? Like, when you get in your car, do you have a map of where you're going? Wow, this is so cool. And so it's like, I don't only know, I know I've seen it, and I've seen it over and over and over again in visual perceptual, visual motor testing, kids' fear of movement going away, kids starting to eat. I mean, it's not consistent exactly what's going to happen, but it's all end products of better.
Yeah.
And then it was like once that happened, and we had done about probably 500 kids, and my husband said, this is really expensive. We got the training, but people had to be 10 days in the clinic. So we charged you for 2 half hours a day, but we just charged you for therapy. We didn't charge any additional, like as if you would come.
Mhm.
But other people were charging 3 and 4 times what we were charging.
Wow.
And so he's like, we just make this accessible because, like, guess what? There was this new technology. Guess what it was? CDs.
Oh, yes. I had your CDs. Yes.
Yeah. So it's just like, so from there, it's like, how could we not do it? That's
Mhm.
kind of, and and I would say to people when I was teaching, mark my word, there's going to be this sound program, that sound program. There's going to be a million of them because it works. It's
Yeah.
not just what we're doing. It's because sound is like, what is everybody saying now everywhere? Move, move, move. And we've always known that about the vestibular system, and movement was key, and a
Right.
variety of movement. The sound can be just like movement. If you don't move in a way that suits the design of your body, you can get hurt, right?
Mhm.
Sound
Mhm.
is the same way. It can impede you. We know a lot now about noise and wellness and how sound can really disrupt the nervous system. But if you get the match, it's very supportive of regulating the nervous system, organizing body movement, as well as higher level perceptual
Mhm.
skills, including higher level auditory processing. But
Yeah.
all of those lower functions, again, it's that scaffolding. You can't
Mhm.
send, if you don't send something up clear, no matter what you have in the high brain, it's not going to develop properly. You have to have good information coming in
Mhm.
and integrating at those lower levels. And they're just basic things that are critical for organization of
Mhm.
everything at a higher level.
Now, I know your program is really integrated or was with movement, like doing
Yes.
particular movements, bilateral integration, midline, a lot of stuff like that.
It,
How
it,
is,
I think people take it that way. But this is what I would say. I've always had a style of sensory integration where I've looked at movement, but and then, sometimes practice movement. And I think people get that impression because sometimes I do pre and post to show families and even
Mhm.
to have like get a feel for how helpful it is with kids. But for the most part, we put the headphones on and follow a child's lead, which isn't necessarily following them around the room. It's like supporting them to do what they want, but seeing what's coming in clearly for them and seeing where they, like with movement, what is the movement piece that they don't quite have? And how can I shape that with, do I take you out of this and power you up by doing something to help you get the feel for that and
Mhm.
giving you words? Like we're
Mhm.
prone to taking kids out and doing things with their feet because if you want to get a clear reach with your hand, well, you need to have your eyes looking. But if you're climbing, that push through the foot translates to the reach. So I might see you in the lycra, fumbling out in a curled up ball. And I'm like,
Right.
you need more power. What is it that you need? Just let's see if toe power works. Let's power up your toes and then go do that. And then they have the feel for it in a basic way and how the leg is connected to the body through. This is something that how movement is connected also goes into that postural piece, and then putting them back in the activity. And I've had kids
Okay.
turn around and go, whoa, and then start using it and go turn to me and say, toe power. It's like, well, that's like the best thing. Or
Yeah.
when I say one of those words to kids and I see them automatically change and use the movement. So
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes, and to me, that's just giving a clean, clear sensory cue.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
to me, that's kind of how I use those lower levels of movement.
Okay.
But it's like when we have to talk about the parts and pieces, and I'll tell you, 30 years ago, I wouldn't have understood what I was saying. And
Mhm.
you can only, I think therapists have to give themselves a break. We only can glean what you can glean. And
Yes.
I feel like you need to take in tools that best suit your way of being a therapist. And that's
Mhm.
where you
Oh, I
start to
love
have your
that.
strength. That we're
I
not
love that.
all going to look the same. We're not all going to use the same tools, but you find I love, love, love watching other OTs work, and they might not do it the way I would do it, but they get to the same end. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, right. It's so, I love it too. It's like I would never have thought about, oh,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
where are they going? And then, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So anyway,
good.
that's just my way of approaching it. Just been what my interests have been my passions, obsessions. I
Okay.
think my own challenges when I was little, and I can go back now and think about those things and think about
Yeah.
how that felt and how that led to being, I wouldn't know it, but I was shyer and
Hmm.
was hesitant about certain things.
Hmm.
Um, until I got really excited about things, and then I just pop out. I think I
Oh,
still have that personality.
oh my gosh. What would you say the difference is between therapeutic listening and the safe and sound protocol?
Well, I think that it's the difference is in the way that they're modulated, and I haven't listened to the safe and sound protocol yet. I'm meaning to do that.
Mhm.
Um, my conception without using it, so now take everything I say with a
Mhm.
grain of salt. I don't really
Yeah.
think you should. I don't really think it's fair for me to say anything really, but my conception after hearing Dr. Stephen Porges talk about it is that it's a little bit more in line with, because he uses a filter band in the speech range, with some of the stuff we do with fine tuning. And,
Mhm.
I know they have different pieces of music and some that are rhythmical. I'd say it's more in the style of how we think about it. We think about one music selection at a time, and a lot of our music is based in basic movement rhythms
Mhm.
in something called the window of rhythm, where you not only hear the music, but you feel it. And I think that we developed that intuitively because we were trying to mimic music that we saw was helpful to our brand of kids, which was children on the spectrum, children with attachment kinds of
Mhm.
issues, and just some classic learning disabilities, which are going to, all the thing that's common with all of those is potential vestibular cerebellar kinds of things. And so we
Yeah.
know that's where rhythm is impacted. So I
Okay.
think more in the music, and that we teach to using different kinds of filtering and thinking that through specifically. And Dr. Porges is, from my understanding, where I'm at right now, and that could
Mhm.
change. You could hear me talk in another year or two, and I might say something different. But
Yeah.
and from talking to people that have used it, colleagues of mine, um, is that they were aimed to, tap into more of that ventral vagal or that safe
Mhm.
circuit. The
Mhm.
interesting thing is that we developed all of our theory based on Dr. Porges's work about the orienting response, which is where he was talking with Georgia DeGangi, and in 1990 had done some AOTA. This was, well, not a lot of internet, like put out a little thing on neuroscience when it was just
Yeah.
burgeoning. And Dr. Porges did something with Georgia DeGangi. And then when I would see kids do that, we called it a listening phase at first. I'm like, oh, they're tapping into the orange response, which then
Mhm.
is the direct polar opposite of the defensive response, which takes you into ventral vagal. So I think we get there a different way. I think we
Mhm.
focus on more of a sensory integrative picture. And I think that we have multiple ways of filtering that we try to teach you to match clinically. So
Gotcha.
I think it's gonna, I've had kids that I've seen do safe and sound with another
Mhm.
practitioner because, and have good results. So I think,
Mhm.
as I said years ago, there's going to be lots of sound. I think the key factor is, how are you as a clinician? Where are you going to
Mhm.
start? What resonates with you and your practice? And then how deeply you dive into understanding sound, and how diligent you are in really looking at the patterns emerging in the kids you see will direct
Mhm.
you how to blend
Gotcha.
programs. Because I don't, like um, David, who I can mention by name, his family wouldn't mind at all, who was one of my first clients, who I saw well into his 30s. If we gave him the safe and sound protocol right now, he would do well. And he did
Mhm.
well on just about any sound protocol. I put him on other things, tomatis. And so I'm
Mhm.
not I'm not averse to blending. I am
Right.
averse to people saying one thing is better than another, or a therapist who has 2 years of experience saying, well, I just always use this. I know that this is the best
Yeah.
program for.
Yeah.
Then when you slap on a label, like a category of for all kids with autism, then it's like, well,
Yeah.
it's
No.
it's not, that's not how I see anything.
How do you deliver the safe or the therapeutic listening? Is it an app now? How do people access it? Because
It
I
is,
remember having the CDs and then they'd get
yes,
stuck.
it's an
Like, dang
app
it.
now, or a micro SD chip.
Okay. Okay.
So in a player, and potentially some movement toward a subscription service for schools. And we still, interestingly enough, my husband was laughing about this the other day. He still, you know, makes CDs. We have a little whole production robot that
Really?
makes CDs because some people still want them. And so
Uh-huh.
we've always been in this more service-oriented way of
Yeah.
delivering therapeutic resources, I mean, therapeutic listening, that, we've always been in, like, we're just trying to meet the needs of therapists instead of, I think, moving into other areas. I think in some ways, potentially to our detriment, but it's always been the mission and the passion.
What would you say some of the challenges have been when you're trying to introduce a new concept or idea into the OT community?
I think I'm just challenged and my feelings get hurt.
Mm,
Because like somebody will tell me somebody said something negative, and it's like, my husband says to me, when you go out, what do you say, when you go out in the front line, you get your arrows in your back, it's like when you go out and do something new, it'll always have opposition.
I mean, if you're going to put yourself in the ring, right? What
Yeah,
is it,
right,
Roosevelt or
exactly.
I can't remember who said that quote,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, when and for me it's my passion gets the best of me. I can't not tell people. How could you
Yeah,
have your own fear of movement be almost,
yeah.
it's still like my friends were doing a post trip after we do a camp in Australia, and they're taking us to New Zealand, and we're supposed to do this rafting trip where we go over a 3-story waterfall. And I'm like, well, it's kicking back in a little bit, but now
Yeah, you gave it to me
I'm
right
thinking,
there.
is this safe for me at my age? I think I have a little bit of osteoporosis, and I'm not sure. But anyway, but it's like, how can that happen for you and you find something that you can't talk about it? It's like you can't shut me up, it's just
Right, right. It's an experience and yeah,
yeah.
meant to be shared.
And
Yeah.
and I've seen, like, as people will say, and you don't have research, we do have, mounting clinical evidence, but it's like, how can I never set out to be a researcher. I never even set out to be anything other than a clinician. And
Hmm.
having success, how can I not share time and time
Hmm.
again? And I've been able to teach people and they've been able to replicate it. So something's there, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. So speaking to like our newer clinicians out there, what do you think are kind of core educational pieces or courses that really would be good to have under their belt?
Oh,
Because I mean, it's hard. You come out and it's like, there's stuff everywhere. But what would you say are like maybe three of the best?
well, I don't know that I could speak to that. I'd be super biased. I mean, um,
Well, your stuff is great.
I'd
Yeah.
be super biased. People do like from our stuff the building blocks. And I would
Hmm.
say if you wanted some tools and some understanding of movement, the building blocks. And then I think of sound. I think the quick shifts is the easiest way to get
Okay.
introduced to any sound,
Hmm.
period, in the easiest kind of way. But I would say from theoretical perspectives, stuff that Tracy Stackhouse is doing is phenomenal. I think she's brilliant. I think a lot of the stuff that Kim Barthel is doing is also really amazing. They do um, happen to be, friends of mine. So, there's a bias there. I don't know. I think if you really, it depends on, to me, again, I think I'd be counseling you based on your interests and what
And your
your
interests.
clientele looks
Hmm.
like. 'Cause then it's like, well, and, if you are very physical and you're interested in physical disabilities, I would definitely, all of us that are my age now did all of the NDT stuff. And
Hmm.
felt
Hmm.
so you really understand a little bit more about handling and movement in a more sophisticated way.
Hmm. Yeah, I
I
don't see
love
much of that anymore. I feel
I
like it's
know.
kind of,
Well, it's because, we don't, I think the incidence of cerebral palsy is down, if I'm
mhm,
correct. And the incidence of other issues in sensory processing and autism is up. I think that's
mhm.
part of it. Um, so, I mean, there's a lot of people that were phenomenal that I trained with that just don't train anymore. I
Yeah.
don't know. That's a hard one for me to
So
answer
really
because,
we're kind of looking at where you want to go,
yeah.
right, in your
Right, where you wanna
practice.
go and anything that, Julie Wilberger does is phenomenal. She's
Okay.
always backed by science. She says things in such a way where she really has the details of the science and really bridges it into, clinical knowing, and she doesn't teach that much anymore. I mean, she teaches every day um, at Dominican, but she's doing something coming up for, the Avanti
Oh
um,
yeah.
camp
Okay.
symposium. So, and I'm doing something there on movement as I was sort of explaining it to you
Yeah.
on movement and posture,
Nice.
from that perspective of like kind of, starting with those lower level patterns and then moving up. Yeah, that's a hard one.
Okay.
Um, I also think there's a lot of really good things that are being taught by other people that are not OTs.
Hmm.
Some of the Dan Hughes stuff is phenomenal just for how to work with human beings that are really having challenges. And we
Okay.
get a lot of that. Some of that more mental health. I
We do.
recently did the module for Theraplay, and I actually really liked it. It reminded me of some things that aren't as sexy as some of the other things that are out here, but just how important structure is. And I really took that away, and I learned a lot from not as much from their words, but there was a lot of videos with just some really brilliant therapists,
Mm.
and just from the watching of that, so it
Yeah.
was really helpful.
What excites you the most right now that's emerging in OT?
That's a really good question. I think probably the merging of all the work in mental health. I think Porges's work is phenomenal, and
Mhm.
I like the blending and how he's blending with a lot of, because I follow a lot of the somatic people, and so
Mhm.
in the trauma world, I like to branch out. I'm also super excited about, and I go for learning outside of OT. So a
Yeah.
lot of the work that people are doing around fascia as a sensory organ, and then some of the people that are working around movement from a fascia perspective, because fascia is really where all the proprioceptors are being held and
Right.
interoceptors. And so thinking about movement from that lens. So that excites me, but it's not an OT. I'm just trying to get people to look at that from an OT
Yeah,
perspective.
I think we have to. Yeah,
Yeah.
we definitely have to.
Yeah.
That's great.
And then some of the work that's going on in um, more of the relationship-based work.
Hmm.
So some of the, like all of the offshoots from floor time. And I think just hearing people that are passionate and again, drawing other people into that.
I know one thing that has come up a lot for us in our clinic is just an influx of kiddos with PDA, so diagnosis. What is your take on that and like a treatment approach?
So tell me again, PD, I don't know
Pervasive demand avoidance.
okay, that's what I thought. That's where I
Yeah.
thought you were going.
I don't think
Uh,
it's not in the
It's, I don't, I
ICD-10
think,
yet.
no, I don't think it should be.
Yeah.
They're afraid. Well, you are afraid when you avoid demands. And
Hmm.
that's, if you just look at the chart of childhood anxiety, it's like this.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the problem. That's anxiety. And then to call it that is terrible as far as I'm concerned. Every
Hmm.
behavior tells a story. Every behavior is there for a reason, and you need to understand that. And the
Yeah.
way that you respond to it, if you respond to it in a way that is understanding and you can help that child make sense out of what's going on for them, that's great. But I don't like I think I've avoided that because it just, even the title makes me really angry.
I know it's yeah, it feels like it's an excuse or something. And it's like, that's
Right.
why all
Well,
of a sudden there's there a new diagnosis.
it's
Because I
because
think people are,
anxiety is sky high, and that's where
oh,
kids
it's
need
so sky high.
predictability, structure, co-regulation. They need the rhythm of relationship. You need to start with what's positive and build on that. And then when you bump into that stuff, you need to be skilled in working out what's going on with them and
Hmm.
being able to interact with them in a way that holds structure and safety for everyone, but that isn't shaming and that doesn't make them feel bad about themselves, because that's the problem, is somewhere COVID did a number on our kids. And you probably, I would say, a lot of your demand avoidance, whatever they call it, is going to be your 4-year-old who was born at the height of COVID, where their parents
Hmm.
were sky high on anxiety. Can you imagine going in to deliver a baby in a hospital that is overstressed
Yeah.
with that? And then you're bringing this baby home and you don't want to go out into public, and then the baby doesn't go out into public for 2 years
And people are
because,
masked
and
too and
people are
not getting
masked.
expressions.
And
Yes.
then you go to the grocery store and and it's scary because you don't know you have no concept of these other people. It just,
Mhm.
and you're not only that, but you're reading your parents' nonverbals and they're freaked out because, and then if you just had a vulnerable nervous system, if you were born early, it's just like,
Teach a course on that, please.
well, that might be, oh, that's a great idea. I
Yeah,
might
because
have
I
to
just feel like
dissect
people
that.
are not approaching it in that way at
No,
all. And
no.
you're just that on.
Yeah. So just like for me, it's that one hits a little close to home. I've seen so many of those kids, and it's like I'm
Mhm.
just like 4-year-olds. And then I was just talking to somebody else about a 4-year-old. I'm like, yeah, 4, that's the magic number right now.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's like you're, you in your twos when you're supposed to, I don't be saying no and whatever, you just keep that going and you learn not only that, it's
Mhm.
not just your parents, what they say. It's like they walk into a grocery store and they stiffen, right?
Yeah.
And they keep
Or walk
covering you
away
up
from
or yeah,
people
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's what you learn. And then
Yeah.
that is all hardwired in fear into that's what you're getting. So what is the
Mhm.
best way if you're afraid is just control things, anything that's new. And you need to
Yeah.
be in charge
Yeah. Thank
because
you. I love that.
yeah.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
my
Let
two
me know when
cents.
you have your course ready.
It's an integration of a lot of things that I've learned from a lot of people. I think um,
Yeah.
that I've had a lot of really good teachers. So again, I think moving a little outside of OT sometimes in some of the play-based things. Daphne Lender is incredible, and she was a theraplay, but she's teaching that combined with some of Dan Hughes's things. And I know she teaches parents, but it's like there's a lot to be learned there in
Mhm.
joining a group where they are teaching parents. And so I think I've always been going out and coming back into OT,
Mhm.
and then again pulling it into my OT lens.
Yeah. I think we have to, especially now because kids have changed.
Yes.
They're not the kids that we were treating 20
No.
years ago.
No, they definitely are not the kids we were
Yeah.
treating 20 years
Yeah.
ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago.
Right.
So, when I first started, if you had autism, even you were in a special classroom and it was one-on-one, and you were in a classroom as part of an auxiliary in mental health.
Mm.
You weren't even mainstreamed in. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where I started. And what we called everybody else, or did they even get services?
Right. Right.
And it was interesting for me because when my first job was in mental health and I was working at this combined acute care. We were with the hospital, but we were a day treatment. And it was at a point where all the institutions were letting people go. So we had some of that, but we also were then charged with how to help these individuals that no longer had to stay in the community, and a lot of them in group homes. And when I was doing my little SI thing in my group, I had a handful of clients, and because they lived in that area their whole life, I was looking back at their school records, and I found a lot of them had they were
Mhm.
put in as learning challenges in special education. It's
Mm.
just that it really just wasn't recognized as mental health issues in kids, or anxiety, or even how sensory processing can lead itself to a vulnerability
Mhm.
to stress that can start to show up like post-traumatic stress or developmental trauma.
Right. Right. Awesome. Well, what is next for you?
I don't know. That's been the thought. There's been some talk
Yeah.
about retiring, but I don't know. I think just slowing down. I'm trying to move solidly into a role that's around mentoring. Um,
Yeah.
and then just steering everything. Now when people call about the practice, I say, well, just I'll tell you how I can help you.
Mhm.
I'm mentoring a child, and the speech therapist is going to come because she's who brought him to me, and then I can support her. And I said, if I can't, out in the community, and just
Mhm.
doing more of that, and just trying to help therapists find their own, it's like we do with the kids, find their own
Yeah.
path, work with their own strengths. And if they love like how it's basically developmental neurobiology is sensory integration, and they love
Mhm.
all those models and ways of looking at things, then I would be a good person for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. What last question? Looking back at your younger practitioner self, what would you now tell that self?
Oh my gosh. That even though you didn't know, you knew. And
Mhm.
that I realized looking back, and I can think of names which I can't say, of who I treated. And I was so passionately connecting, doing my best, not knowing a damn thing, really, or
Yeah.
knew these little things, and then I made a difference.
Yeah. It was just intuitive, right?
It was
Yeah.
intuitive, and it was because I cared and because I was present in that
Mm.
moment with that family, and I believed I could make a difference, and I did. It
Mhm.
was, and I'd like always like you're always going to have. I have one in my mind. I can hear the name clearly. If I only knew then what I know now. But
Yeah.
then I just tell myself it didn't matter. And
Right.
so I think finding your passion, working to your strengths, and working and going with you. Ask about teachers and classes. Go with who resonates with you.
Mm.
You know what? When you hear someone, you get really excited and you understand, or they broaden your views.
Mhm.
Stick away from anybody that tells you that there is one right way and it's theirs. I think that's a danger trap, and there's only one way.
Absolutely.
And when they start telling you somebody else is doing something bad and they're doing it right, then you should just really think things through a little clearly.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I could just pick your brain for hours,
Well,
but
it was super fun. So I really had fun doing it.